"You don't live here anymore." Those were the first words my wife Melissa said when I returned home from my mother's funeral. Standing in front of our house of 7 years, suitcase still in my car, eyes red from 3 days of grief and little sleep. Her voice was cold, detached, like she was talking to a stranger who'd knocked on the wrong door. "My name is Eric. I'm 35, work as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company in Austin. And until that moment, I thought I was happily married. I'd spent the past 5 days in Chicago, arranging my mother's funeral after she lost her 3-year battle with cancer. The hardest 5 days of my life. And now this. What are you talking about?" I asked, keys in hand, still not comprehending what was happening, my voice cracking with disbelief. Melissa stood in the doorway, blocking my entry. "Those keys won't work. I changed the locks yesterday." I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "You changed the locks? Why?" My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I've also changed all the passwords. Bank accounts, Netflix, Amazon, email. Everything. You should find somewhere else to stay tonight." And then she closed the door in my face. I just stood there, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach, staring at the door I'd painted myself 2 summers ago. The welcome mat we'd picked out together on our trip to Santa Fe. The potted plants I'd watered faithfully before leaving for my mother's deathbed. Everything looked exactly the same, except my key didn't work and my wife had just told me I was homeless. Melissa and I had been married for 5 years. We met at a friend's barbecue. The classic reach for the same beer moment that we'd laughed about countless times since. She was smart, ambitious, worked in marketing for a luxury retail brand. We'd clicked instantly, same sense of humor, same love of travel, same desire to build a life together but wait on having kids until our careers were established. My mother never liked her. "There's something calculating about her, Eric," Mom would say, her eyes filled with concern. "She's always watching, always keeping score." I defended Melissa, telling Mom she just needed time to warm up, that Melissa was just reserved around people she didn't know well. The memory of those conversations now twisted in my gut like a knife. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to my mother's instincts. The relationship between Melissa and my mom had been tense from the beginning. Melissa thought my mom was too involved in our lives, too opinionated about our decisions. Mom thought Melissa was controlling, always needing to have the final say. 3 years ago, when Mom was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer, things got worse. I wanted to visit more often, help with appointments, be there for her. Melissa thought I was dropping everything for your mother's latest crisis. We argued about it constantly, her voice always cold, dismissive. "She has your sisters there," Melissa would say, rolling her eyes. "She doesn't need you to run to Chicago every time she calls." But my sisters had families, young children. I had more flexibility with my remote work situation. And she was my mother. Of course I was going to be there. The guilt I felt whenever I couldn't visit haunted me constantly. When Mom's condition worsened last month, I spent 2 weeks in Chicago. Melissa had been increasingly distant on our calls, one-word responses, vague about what she was doing. I thought she was just upset about me being gone so long. I had no idea she was planning this. The call came at 3 a.m. on Sunday. Mom was gone. I'd booked the first flight out, called Melissa with the news, voice breaking as I told her about the arrangements. She'd seemed sympathetic, said all the right things. "Take all the time you need," she'd said. "Don't worry about anything here." The memory of her false sympathy now made my stomach churn with anger. 5 days later, I returned to a changed house and a changed life. I knocked on the door again, harder this time, my palms stinging with each impact. "Melissa, open the door. This is ridiculous." My voice was raw with emotion, tears threatening to spill over. No response. I called her phone, straight to voicemail. I sat on the front steps, trying to understand what was happening. The concrete cold beneath me. Had she lost her mind? Was this some kind of bizarre grief test? Was she punishing me for being gone too long? The confusion and hurt swirled inside me like a storm. I walked around to the back of the house, checking windows, hoping she'd forgotten one. All locked. Through the kitchen window, I could see she'd already packed my coffee mug, the one I used every morning, into a box labeled Eric's stuff. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. My hands were shaking as the realization hit me. I called my friend Derek, explained what was happening, my voice breaking multiple times. 20 minutes later, he picked me up and took me back to his place. "She's been acting weird for weeks, man," Derek said as we drove. "Every time we had you guys over for dinner, she was on her phone the whole time. Rachel thought she might be seeing someone else." "That's impossible," I said automatically, a hollow defense. But even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure anymore. The distance, the vague answers about her evenings, the sudden gym membership she'd never mentioned wanting before. My chest tightened painfully as pieces started falling into place. "When was the last time you checked your bank accounts?" Derek asked, his eyes filled with concern. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, fingers trembling. Password incorrect. Just like she'd said. I tried our joint credit card. Same result. My stomach dropped as reality set in. "She's locked me out of everything," I said, my voice barely audible. While I was burying my mother, my wife was erasing me from our life. That night I barely slept. I kept cycling through emotions. Grief for my mother, shock at Melissa's betrayal, anger at being locked out of my own home, fear about what would come next. By morning, my eyes were swollen and red, but I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to beg or plead. I was going to fight. I called in sick to work and spent the morning making lists, tears occasionally blurring my vision. What accounts did we have? What assets? What was solely in my name versus jointly held? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how vulnerable I'd been. We'd merged everything when we got married: bank accounts, investments, insurance policies. Even my paycheck went into our joint account. The only thing I had that she couldn't access was my company laptop, which thankfully I'd taken with me to Chicago. Around noon, I tried calling Melissa again, my heart racing with each ring. This time she answered. "What do you want, Eric?" "I want to know what's going on," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I just buried my mother, Melissa. I come home to find the locks changed and all our accounts locked. You owe me an explanation." She sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "I've been planning this for months. Your mother's timing was unfortunate." Her callousness took my breath away. "Planning what exactly?" I managed to ask. "Our marriage hasn't been working for a long time. You know that. Always putting your family first, never considering my needs. I'm done. And you decided to tell me this by changing the locks while I was at my mother's funeral?" I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice, anger finally overtaking grief. "I knew if I told you face to face, you'd try to talk me out of it. Make me feel guilty. This was cleaner." "Cleaner? This isn't a business transaction, Melissa. This is our marriage." My voice cracked as emotion overwhelmed me. "Was our marriage," she corrected, cold and clinical. "I've already filed the papers. My lawyer will contact you." Before I could respond, she hung up. I sat in Derek's guest room, staring at my phone, feeling like the world was collapsing around me. 5 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. Not with a conversation, not with counseling, not even with a fight. Just locks changed and passwords reset like I was an employee being fired. But then something occurred to me. Something that made my heart race with a mixture of hope and determination. She'd said she'd changed all the passwords. But had she really? Had she really thought of everything? I opened my laptop and thought carefully, wiping away tears that threatened to blur my vision. What accounts might she have forgotten about? What passwords would she not know? Then it hit me: my cloud storage account. 3 years ago, I'd set it up to automatically back up my phone and laptop. Melissa had her own account, never used mine. The password was a variation of my mother's maiden name and birth year, something Melissa always found unnecessarily sentimental. I logged in, heart pounding. It worked. She'd forgotten about it. A small smile broke through my grief for the first time in days. And there it was, everything. Photos, documents, text message backups, email archives. 5 years of digital life preserved and organized. I started digging through recent backups, looking for anything that might explain Melissa's sudden action, hands trembling with both anticipation and dread. In the photos section, I found a folder I didn't recognize. House ideas. I clicked on it, expecting to see renovation plans or furniture we'd discussed. Instead, I found dozens of photos of a modern high-rise condo. Sleek, minimalist, clearly expensive. In some of the photos, Melissa was standing in the empty rooms, smiling widely. In one, she was holding up a set of keys. The timestamps showed these were taken 3 weeks ago, while I was in Chicago with my dying mother. My throat tightened as the betrayal deepened. I kept digging, my anger growing with each discovery. In my text message backups, I found exchanges between Melissa and someone saved as M that went back 6 months. As I read through them, my hands started shaking uncontrollably. He's gone again. Come over. Can't wait to live together officially. Just a few more weeks and we'll tell him. The condo closes next week. Everything's in my name only. The most recent ones were from the day my mother died. The day I'd called Melissa in tears, seeking comfort from my wife. His mom died. He's staying in Chicago for the funeral. Perfect timing. We can move your things this weekend. What about his stuff? I'll pack the bare minimum. The rest can go to Goodwill. I felt physically ill, rushing to the bathroom where I dry heaved over the toilet. Not only had Melissa been cheating, but she'd been planning to leave me for months. She'd bought a condo, was moving this person in, all while I was grieving my mother. The depth of her cruelty was breathtaking. But who was M? I checked email archives next, wiping away tears of rage. There, in a folder labeled Personal, I found correspondence between Melissa and someone named Michael. Dozens of emails dating back almost a year. Love letters, explicit photos, detailed plans for their future together. Michael Chin. A name I recognized with a sickening jolt. Melissa's boss. The man who'd promoted her twice in the past year. The man she'd said was happily married with 3 kids. I sat back, trying to process everything I discovered, feeling like I might be sick again. My wife hadn't just betrayed me. She'd calculated, planned, and executed an exit strategy designed to leave me with nothing. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd forgotten about the cloud. I spent the next few hours downloading everything, organizing the evidence, creating multiple backups, my hands still shaking but now with determination rather than shock. Then I called a lawyer, Sandra Patel, who'd helped a colleague through a particularly nasty divorce last year. Can you see me today? I asked, my voice urgent. It's an emergency. 3 hours later, I was sitting in Sandra's office, showing her everything I'd found. My eyes still red from crying, but my resolve strengthening by the minute. This is quite thorough, she said, scrolling through the evidence. And you're certain the condo is in her name only? Based on the texts, yes. But I don't know where it is or how she paid for it. My voice was steadier now, focusing on facts rather than emotions. Sandra nodded. We'll find out. What's most concerning here is the timing. Making these changes while you were at a funeral shows extraordinary callousness, which won't play well in court. Additionally, the fact that she's locked you out of joint accounts could be considered financial abuse. What should I do now? I can't even access my own paycheck. The vulnerability in my voice was evident. First, we file for an emergency hearing to get you back into your house and restore access to at least some of your joint funds. Then we prepare for war. She looked at me seriously. This won't be quick or easy, Eric. She's had months to prepare. We're playing catch-up. I understand, I said, a new determination hardening my voice. But I have one advantage she doesn't know about. What's that? All of this. I gestured to the evidence spread across her desk, a small smile of vindication crossing my face. She thinks she erased every trace. She has no idea what's coming. Sandra smiled slightly. That is indeed an advantage. Now, here's what we need to do immediately. I left her office with a plan, my step lighter than it had been since my mother died. First, open new accounts at a different bank. Contact my employer to redirect my next paycheck. Document everything about being locked out of the house. And under no circumstances confront Melissa about what I'd discovered. Let her think you're floundering, Sandra advised. The more complacent she is, the better position we'll be in. That night, back at Derek's, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't just grief and shock keeping me awake. It was determination. Melissa thought she'd blindsided me, left me helpless and reeling. She had no idea what was coming. I just needed to be patient. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday, just 3 days after I'd returned from the funeral. Sandra had worked miracles to get it on the calendar so quickly. Meanwhile, Melissa had been ignoring my calls and texts. The only communication I received was from someone named Julian Barrett, introducing himself as her attorney. His message was coldly efficient. A list of times when I could collect some personal items from the house, with Melissa present to supervise, and a warning not to contact her directly anymore. Reading his email made my blood boil all over again. I showed the message to Sandra. Barrett's got a reputation, she said. Aggressive, not always ethical, but effective. He specializes in high-asset divorces where one spouse wants to protect their wealth. She looked at me. Does Melissa have family money you haven't mentioned? No, her parents are middle-class teachers. Everything we have, we built together. I paused, my voice catching. At least that's what I thought. Thursday morning, I put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to my mother's funeral just days earlier, and met Sandra at the courthouse. We were ushered into a small hearing room where Judge Martinez, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, presided. Melissa and Julian Barrett arrived exactly on time. She wouldn't look at me, keeping her eyes fixed on her phone or her lawyer. She was dressed impeccably, as always, in a conservative navy blue dress that made her look professional and sympathetic. Seeing her again after everything I discovered made my stomach churn with a mixture of love, hate, and confusion. The hearing began with Barrett presenting their side, that Melissa felt unsafe in the home due to my increasingly erratic behavior, that she'd changed the locks out of genuine concern, and that limiting my access to our finances was a temporary protective measure. I watched in disbelief, my hands clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms, as my wife of 5 years calmly portrayed me as unstable and potentially dangerous, all while I was grieving my mother. When Barrett mentioned that Melissa was afraid for her safety, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The performance was so convincing that, for a moment, I almost doubted my own sanity. Then it was Sandra's turn. Your Honor, the timing of Mrs. Wilson's actions cannot be overlooked. My client was attending his mother's funeral when his wife changed the locks, passwords, and effectively rendered him homeless and penniless. If she truly feared for her safety, why wait until he was hundreds of miles away mourning his mother to take these actions? She presented evidence of my mother's death certificate, flight information, and funeral program. Then, carefully, she introduced a small selection of evidence from my cloud account, just enough to show that Melissa had been planning this for months, not responding to any immediate threat. Furthermore, Sandra continued, we have reason to believe Mrs. Wilson has purchased a new residence without my client's knowledge, using marital funds. At this, Melissa's head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. Barrett whispered something to her urgently. The look of panic on Melissa's face gave me the first feeling of satisfaction I'd had in weeks. Judge Martinez reviewed the documents, her expression growing increasingly disapproving. When she looked up, her gaze was fixed on Melissa. Mrs. Wilson, am I to understand that you locked your husband out of his home while he was attending his mother's funeral? Your Honor, it's not that simple, Barrett began. I was addressing Mrs. Wilson, the judge interrupted. Melissa cleared her throat. Yes, Your Honor, but only because the timing worked I felt it was necessary for my emotional well-being. Her voice wavered, the practice performance slipping. And the new property referenced in these documents? Melissa looked genuinely startled, her composure cracking completely. I don't know how he found out about that. The judge's eyebrows rose. So you acknowledge there is a new property? Barrett jumped in. My client used her personal funds for a down payment on a condominium where she intends to reside during the divorce proceedings. There's nothing improper about that. Personal funds from what source? Sandra asked, her voice deceptively gentle. Melissa looked at Barrett, who gave a small nod. I received a significant bonus at work earlier this year, she said. It was my money. A bonus from Michael Chen? Sandra asked innocently. The color drained from Melissa's face. She looked like she might faint, and despite everything, a small part of me wanted to go to her, to make sure she was okay. The emotional whiplash was exhausting. Judge Martinez held up a hand. That's enough. Based on the evidence presented, I am issuing a temporary order. Mr. Wilson is to be given immediate access to the marital home. Mrs. Wilson is to restore his access to all joint accounts within 24 hours. Neither party is to dispose of or hide marital assets. We will schedule a full hearing in 2 weeks. She looked at Melissa coldly. And Mrs. Wilson, I suggest you find alternative living arrangements if you're uncomfortable residing with your husband. The court does not look favorably on parties who use emotional manipulation tactics during divorce proceedings. As we left the courtroom, Melissa tried to approach me, her face a mixture of shock and pleading. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something there I hadn't expected: fear. But Sandra stepped between us. All communication through counsel, she said firmly. For the first time since I'd returned home, I felt like I could breathe. The knot in my chest loosened just slightly. The next day, I returned to our house with a police escort to ensure compliance with the judge's order. My hands trembled as I put the new key in the lock. Melissa wasn't there. Barrett had informed Sandra that she would be vacating the premises temporarily to comply with the court order. Walking into my own home felt surreal, my emotions threatening to overwhelm me again. Everything looked the same but different, like a stage set of my life rather than the actual thing. In the home office, I noticed empty spaces on the shelves where Melissa's professional awards had been. In the closet, about a third of her clothes were gone. She'd been moving out in stages. I realized, my throat tight, planning methodically even as she texted me sympathetic messages about my mother's declining health. The police officer waited patiently as I changed the locks, with court permission, and then departed after confirming I had safe access to my home. Once alone, I began a systematic search of the house, looking for anything Melissa might have left behind that could help me understand what had happened. In the guest room closet, I found what I was looking for: a box labeled Tax Docs 2017 to 2018 that I knew contained older financial records. Inside, beneath a layer of actual tax forms, was a folder labeled MC Project. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were printouts of email exchanges between Melissa and Michael Chen dating back 18 months. Not personal emails. These were work communications about a special project that required frequent travel and confidential handling. As I read through them, the picture became clear, and my confusion gave way to cold understanding. The project was a new product line that Melissa had apparently developed, one that showed tremendous promise. But the company they both worked for, Lumina Brands, had strict policies about workplace relationships. If Melissa and Michael wanted to be together, one of them would need to leave the company and potentially lose control of the project she'd created. The solution, outlined in these emails, was a plan to spin off a new company with Melissa at the helm, backed by investment from Michael's family. The product line would follow her to the new venture. The potential valuation was in the millions. But there was one complication: me. Specifically, Texas's community property laws that would entitle me to half of any business created during our marriage. That's when I found the prenup review. Melissa had apparently consulted a lawyer 6 months ago to see if our prenuptial agreement would protect her new business venture from being considered marital property. The answer: no. Our prenup had a sunset clause that expired after 5 years of marriage, which had passed 3 months ago. Everything made sense now. The timing, the secrecy, the rush to file for divorce. Melissa wasn't just leaving me for Michael. She was trying to secure a financial future that didn't include sharing her potential millions with me. The realization made me laugh bitterly through tears. I took photos of everything and sent them to Sandra, then carefully returned the box exactly as I'd found it. Melissa didn't know I'd discovered this, and for now that was my advantage. 2 days later, I received a settlement offer from Barrett. It was insulting Melissa would keep the house, her retirement accounts, and her personal business ventures, while I would get my personal belongings, my own retirement account, and a generous one-time payment of $75,000. Reading it made me shake with rage. Sandra laughed when she saw it. "They're testing the waters," she said. "They don't know how much you know." We countered with our own offer, one that specifically mentioned the new business venture with Michael Chun, and requested 50% ownership as community property. Barrett called Sandra within an hour of receiving it. For the first time, they requested a mediation session rather than proceeding directly to court. My heart raced at the thought of facing Melissa again. The mediation was set for the following week. Melissa arrived with Barrett and another lawyer, a woman I didn't recognize who was introduced as representing Lumina Brand's interests. That was interesting. Her employer was now involved in our divorce proceedings. Melissa looked tired, the confident mask slipping slightly. She still wouldn't meet my eyes, and I found myself staring at her, searching for traces of the woman I'd married. As the mediation began, Barrett presented a revised offer more generous than before, but still nowhere near what I was entitled to under community property laws. "Before we continue," Sandra said, "I'd like to understand the involvement of Lumina Brands in these proceedings. What interest does Mr. Wilson's wife's employer have in their divorce?" The Lumina lawyer cleared her throat. "The company has intellectual property concerns that may be affected by the division of assets." "Intellectual property such as the MC project?" Sandra asked innocently. The room went silent. Barrett and the Lumina lawyer exchanged glances. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. "We're aware of the planned business venture," Sandra continued. "The timeline of development, the involvement of Michael Chen, the investment structure through his family, and the plan to remove these assets from the marital estate by expediting divorce proceedings before launching publicly." She placed a folder on the table. "We're also aware of the relationship between Mrs. Wilson and her supervisor, Michael Chun, which violates Lumina's workplace policy and raises serious questions about the recent promotions and bonuses Mrs. Wilson has received." Melissa was now visibly pale. The Lumina lawyer was writing furiously on her notepad. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness watching Melissa's carefully constructed world crumble. "My client is entitled to half of all assets acquired during the marriage," Sandra said. "This includes businesses developed, even those not yet launched. Additionally, he has grounds for filing a tort claim for alienation of affection and could potentially bring Lumina into litigation if we find that company resources were misused in the development of this side business." Barrett asked for a break. The three of them left the room for nearly 45 minutes. When they returned, Melissa looked like she'd been crying, her mascara slightly smudged. Despite everything, seeing her in distress still tugged at my heart. Barrett presented a new offer. It was substantially better, a fair division of our existing assets, plus a 30% stake in Melissa's new business venture when it launched. Sandra looked at me. I nodded slightly, a lump in my throat. "We're getting closer," she said. "But given the circumstances, the attempt to hide assets, the lockout during a funeral, the workplace impropriety, we believe 45% is more appropriate." Another break. Another huddle. Finally, they agreed to 40% with additional provisions about governance and profit distribution. As the mediator finalized the agreement, Melissa finally spoke directly to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "About the business, about Michael, about everything." "How?" I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman I thought I'd married. Not the stranger who had calculated the best time to destroy me was when I was burying my mother. My voice was steady but filled with emotion. "You forgot about the cloud," I said simply. "You changed all the passwords, but you forgot about the automatic backups." Her face crumpled with realization, and for the first time since this all began, I saw genuine regret in her eyes. But it was too late. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Each day a mixture of grief for my mother and grief for my marriage. True to the agreement, I retained 40% ownership in Melissa's new company, which launched 6 months after that. The product line was indeed successful, featured in major retail chains and fashion magazines. I stayed in Austin but bought a new house in a different neighborhood. Too many memories in the old one. I continued my software engineering work but also became more involved in the management of my investment in Melissa's company, attending quarterly meetings, reviewing financial statements. It was awkward at first, but eventually became just business. Melissa and Michael went public with their relationship shortly after our divorce was finalized. According to mutual friends, they moved into the condo together. Michael did eventually leave his wife, though from what I heard, his children weren't speaking to him. Knowing the pain of betrayal, I felt sorry for his family. A year after the divorce, I received an unexpected email from Melissa, making my heart race when I saw her name in my inbox. I know I have no right to ask this, but I need to know, would you consider selling your stake in the company? Michael's family is uncomfortable with you being involved. We can offer above market value. I thought about it for a long time, my emotions still raw whenever I thought about her. Not because I was considering selling, but because I was reflecting on how completely Melissa had transformed in my mind from beloved wife to calculating business adversary. No, I replied finally. I'm quite happy with my investment. It's performing well. She didn't respond. Another 6 months passed. The company continued to grow, and my 40% stake was now worth considerably more than our entire marital estate had been. In a twist of irony, the value of my ownership in her new venture far exceeded what an equal division of our original assets would have given me. Sometimes I laughed through tears at how her plan had backfired. I dated occasionally but was in no rush to remarry. The experience had changed me, made me more cautious but also more aware of what I actually wanted in a relationship. Then one day, I received another email from Melissa, making my hands shake as I opened it. I never apologized for what I did. The timing with your mother's funeral was unforgivable. I've been seeing a therapist who's helping me understand the person I became and why I did what I did. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the pain I caused, and I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Some things don't need closure. Some wounds heal better on their own. Last month, I attended a tech conference in Chicago and decided to visit my mother's grave while I was there. As I stood placing flowers, tears streaming down my face, I found myself talking to her as if she were there. You were right about Melissa, Mom. You saw what I couldn't see. I smiled sadly. But in a weird way, I'm better off now. Financially, professionally, even personally. I know what to look for now, what red flags to watch for. As I was leaving the cemetery, my phone buzzed with a notification. The quarterly financial report from Melissa's company had arrived. Revenues were up 40% year over year. My stake was now worth over $2 million. I thought about what Melissa had been trying to achieve with her careful planning, her deception, her cruelty. She'd wanted to start a new life with Michael, build a successful company, and keep all the rewards for herself. Instead, she'd made me a millionaire while having to face me across a conference table 4 times a year for financial reviews. Every time we have those meetings, I see the recognition in her eyes, the understanding that her elaborate plan had backfired spectacularly because she forgot one simple thing. The cloud storage account she never used, never thought about, never remembered to disconnect. Sometimes I want to laugh, sometimes I want to cry, but mostly I feel a sense of peace knowing that justice found its way. Sometimes the smallest oversights have the biggest consequences. People often ask if I'm bitter about what happened. The truth is, I was for a long time. Losing my mother and my marriage in the same week was a devastation I wouldn't wish on anyone. But time provides perspective. Melissa thought she was punishing me by changing those locks and passwords while I was at my lowest point. Instead, she set in motion a series of events that would ultimately punish her far more than me. Every quarter, when I receive my distribution check from the company, I donate a portion to ovarian cancer research in my mother's name. It feels right somehow that some good should come from all of this. Sometimes I break down in tears signing those donation checks, thinking of Mom. I like to think Mom would appreciate the irony, that her passing, which Melissa tried to use against me, ultimately led to the discovery that saved me from being left with nothing. Remember that one thing Melissa forgot? In the end, it wasn't just the cloud storage account. It was that the truth, no matter how well hidden, has a way of coming to light.